Emily Nash. Thank you for being here today. I'm very excited to have you on.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me here. I'm really excited to talk about myself. Don't know if that's a weird thing to say, but yeah, excited to be here.
It's an important thing,
Yes.
especially in our world when we don't get to be in our experience often as therapists. We're always the listener. So
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
excited that you're here to talk about yourself. You're doing some
Yeah.
really cool shit.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, I
Yeah,
feel good.
awesome. Awesome. Well, let me formally introduce you.
Okay.
So Emily Nash is a Honduran American anti-oppressive trauma and relational therapist and licensed social worker specializing in childhood trauma. She practices from the belief that trauma therapy and relational therapy go hand in hand. Often the catalyst for healing is a meaningful and reciprocal connection. Utilizing somatic and experiential modalities combined with talk therapy to help folks experience embodied healing from trauma. Her work with clients allows space for how systemic oppression has played a role in clients' trauma and welcomes all identities folks hold. Emily brings a warmth, empathetic presence, and even humor to build safety and trust in the therapeutic connection. Did I miss
Beautiful.
anything?
I don't think so. I think that's me in a nutshell.
Awesome, awesome. So let's dive in. I'm curious to
Okay.
know how you got started in what you do, how you chose the path you chose. How does your own story inform?
Wow. Okay. Yeah, big
Start with the
question.
easy ones.
Well, that's the easy one. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I'm like a brand new baby therapist. I've only been practicing as a therapist for the past year.
Mm,
I kind of fell into this work, I suppose. I have this like really clear memory of one of my high school teachers who I was very close to. I remember she told me one time, like, you would make a really good counselor. And I was like, absolutely not, but thank you for saying that. I did not imagine this for myself until very recently, I suppose.
mm,
I actually started an undergrad in journalism. I always thought I was going to be a writer.
mm,
That was always like my big dream as a kid. Writing was just a really important tool for me. I kind of grew up in a volatile environment and had a lot of stressors in my life as a kid. So writing was my escape. And I always thought I'm going to be a creative writer.
mm.
Um, then I kind of like hit reality when I was going into college, and I was like, okay, maybe that's not going to actually make me that much money. So I'll try journalism. I tried that, did that for about a year in undergrad at UT Austin.
Mm.
Hated it, really did not enjoy it.
Oh.
And I was like, okay, what do I do? What do I do? So I had taken one sociology class. I decided, okay, let's try sociology as a major, and I loved it.
Mm.
But sociology is one of those degrees that's like, what do you do with that? Like, you could
Yeah.
do a lot of things, but also you're not qualified to do a lot of things. And so I always knew I had a really strong sense of like social justice
Mm.
and some sort of like advocacy work. And so I kind of fell into case management right out of undergrad. And so I did that for roles like that for about 4-ish years after undergrad. And at some point, I was like, this makes no money. I'm really stressed. There's a lot of burnout. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to get a master's degree in social work, and then I'm just going to figure it out. Hopefully, that will solve my problems career wise.
Hmm.
So I went back to school. It took me about 3 years to get my master's degree in social work. And during that time, I decided, you know what? Maybe my teacher made a good point. Like maybe I would be a good therapist. I think the parts of case management that I really enjoyed was just human connection. I
Mm.
hated doing paperwork. I That type of work just really burned me out. But I loved talking to people. I loved connecting with people. I got to do home visits for older adults. That was the population I worked with,
Mm.
and they just like need someone to talk to oftentimes, and that was the part of the job that I really loved. So I decided to go back and do clinical social work, pursue that, and now I'm a therapist. I'm working at a group practice right now called, well, I'm kind of in a weird transition right now, but I am going to be working with a small group called Mind and Yours Psychotherapy. Um, I primarily do trauma therapy,
Mhm,
which is amazing work. It's difficult work, but
mhm,
really incredible work. I think for myself, I experienced a lot of embodied healing in my early 20s from a lot of my complex PTSD, childhood trauma.
mhm,
I had a really amazing therapist at the time, and I was like, wow, I want to do that for other people.
mhm.
Um, so here I am. And that's the work that I do. That's how I got here.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. I hear a lot of likeness in your story to my story, and it's very interesting. Like you're like, I fell into it.
Yeah.
The thought I had was like, who doesn't? You know, like
Right.
we all just
Oh my
kind of fall
gosh.
into this thing that um and often when you're starting out, you think maybe there being a therapist is going to be one thing and it ends up being a completely other thing. And your own growth is very indicative of how you hold yourself as a therapist. So I'm glad that you have found your own way of holding your experience and healing. That's very powerful, especially when you're doing that heavy lifting of being a trauma therapist.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. Yeah, I think to your point of like falling into the work, I've been thinking about this recently, but so many of us have been therapists in some capacity for a long time. I think even before we entered this profession, like, I don't know about you, but like in my family, I was very much like the mediator. And in my friend group, I've very much been like the therapist friend. And so I think a lot of this is just like kind of inherent, I suppose. But there's so much to it that like I could have never imagined until I actually started to be a therapist. And now that I'm in it, I love the work. It's like amazing. But wow, a lot of shit comes up for you, like personally, when you're a therapist. And I was not prepared for that. So it's been a journey for sure.
Yes, and it is a journey, and that's very real. I one of my favorite things that I was ever told by a supervisor was you can't lead someone through the work unless you've been through that work yourself in some form or fashion. And learning how to hold yourself in the therapeutic work is essential when we talk about capacity. Um, and so it's always good to hear that um, people are doing the work to really heal their own lived experience. And I hear you. I also had that caretaker role in my family, and it comes very naturally and even with friends, and it's very intuitive what we do. And when you get into it, that intuition is still very important, but it's not all of it. And so learning how to kind of hold this balance of what I want to do versus what I have to do or what is legally or ethically necessary for me can be really hard.
Oh, yeah.
Um, so I feel that for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So much that grad school does not prepare you for. I think, yeah, especially with, I don't remember exactly what you said, but like you can only take people as far as you've gone yourself,
Mhm.
essentially. Yeah, sometimes I find myself like in a session, I'm like, oh, I'm experiencing this too. And I don't know how to help myself. How do I help you? That's
Mhm.
such a real thing that for some reason in my brain before I did this work, I was like, I'm a therapist. Like I'm a professional. Like I have the skills, I have the things, I have the knowledge. And then you're in it and you're like, shit, how do I help you? What do I do? So scary, very scary moments. But yeah, I think especially in the climate that we're in right now, um, the siege in Gaza, and we're witnessing a genocide, we're witnessing police brutality, we're witnessing anti-blackness, and all of these things, all of these forms of oppression and climate change. Like so many people are kind of experiencing similar things because we're all living under this oppressive system. Um, I find myself, yeah, recently I've kind of been like, yeah, like that's so real, and I'm in it too, and we're kind of in this together in a lot of ways. Sometimes we find empowerment in naming that. And then other times it's like, well, we can't solve this in a 50-minute session. So where do we go
Mhm.
from here?
Mhm.
Yeah, that's kind of a bit of a weird segue, but yeah, something that's I've been thinking about and that's been coming up for me along the realm of, leading someone only as far as you've been able to go yourself.
Really. And I think it's a very important segue. I've been very curious about your experience as um, a brown body in a system that is very colonized, very oppressive. Like, what has that been like? Even in your journey as a therapist, it's something that often we don't talk about, but we encounter all the time, whether we're doing continued education and there's only white trainers, or our um, environments or even schooling education systems are very institutionalized. What has that been like for you?
Yeah.
Let's name it.
Yeah,
Let's
for
go there.
sure. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Ooh, whole can of worms. Yeah, I mean, I will name for myself, I'm half white, and so I
Mhm,
do have this, proximity to whiteness that I think is really important for me to name and acknowledge.
mhm,
And still, as someone who's not often racialized as white, it's weird. It's a weird field to navigate. I think especially in the mental health field that one is deeply capitalist.
mhm,
That's one side of it. Two, it's just a very white field, like you mentioned. I think that there's like pervasive gatekeeping in this field that I think is really hard to navigate as people of color
mhm,
and as folks who don't have a lot of resources, who come from maybe a working class background. Like my parents are working class.
mhm.
And yeah, figuring out how to like run a business, like if you're in private practice or being like a contractor. These are things
Yeah.
that like
Yes.
we don't know shit about oftentimes.
Yeah.
And it's such an isolating experience, I think, for a lot of therapists. I think it has been for me too. I'm only 10 months into this field, really. And so I think I'm still experiencing a lot of growing pains and I'm still experiencing a lot of imposter syndrome, which I don't like as a term because I think that, the institutions that we're in, including the mental health field, was not like we were not designed to be here as
Mhm,
like people and women of color, right? As working class people. I think this is just like a very like white dominated field. And so yeah, that imposter syndrome feels very pathologized. It feels very like individualized when really I think it's just like this bigger system that is oppressive and that is meant to keep us out.
mhm.
Um, and it's hard. Like it's really, really hard work. It's lonely work. I think it's taken me some time to really find my community within the therapist and mental health community. I I think the connections that I have made with therapists who are like-minded as me has really kept me afloat. But there have been many times in the last year where I've been like, damn, did I make the wrong decision? Like this is really hard. Like financially, it's hard.
Mhm.
Again, that impostery feeling is really challenging. Yeah, so many things, so many layers to it. It's not easy work. And like I think folks like us, people who hold marginalized identities need to be in this field. Like I think we need so many more people like us to be therapists and to be healers in some capacity. So it's kind of like insidious that the field is so gatekeepy and keeps certain people out when it's what we need the most. We need more therapists of color. We need more therapists who are queer and trans and indigenous and black folks who hold marginalized identities. We need healers like this. So yeah, I don't remember what your question was now.
Well, you answered it in a very good way. I agree. I agree. Finding identity as a therapist when the system is not set up for marginalized and capitalized bodies is difficult. I can remember in my early days, I'm up in the Pacific Northwest, so it's a majority of white bodies up here. So every single supervisor I had, every single colleague I had was white-bodied, and so it influences, it impacts the way that you grow and you learn and you develop, and um, even holding that balance between brown and white body and being mixed race can hold also a lot of pressure and a lot of weight. So that journey in me of how do I fit in? How can I be 100% authentically me when only part of me is maybe accepted in this way
Mhm. Mhm.
is an upstream battle. And figuring out how to grow into that can be difficult, but it is what you're saying around finding the community that can hold and support you through those growing pains, and that's so important. And it means sometimes creating your own platform, right? Like that
Oh,
is
yeah.
why I'm doing this podcast so that we can start naming the things that aren't named in the therapeutic community, changing those power dynamics, decolonizing our learning and education, because oftentimes we have lived experience that we're told we can't bring into the work that we do, or we shouldn't. It's too messy, it's too dangerous, it's too much. And so I think that's bullshit.
Yeah.
So I think that, you can be a therapist and you can be a human, and it can be complicated and messy and yeah, I
Yeah.
don't
I'm human too,
know.
period. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you're creating the space for therapists and healers. Because you're right. Like, I think, I mean, at least when I was in school, and I was just in school, like I just graduated, but I still was taught, this blank slate therapy, whatever the hell bullshit that we're supposed to be doing as therapists. Yeah, I remember I had a class where, you do a lot of mock therapy in
Yes.
grad school. It kind of feels like improv a little bit, which is kind of weird. But yeah, I remember like I had an assignment with a therapist where we were doing like mock therapy, and I kept saying one word that was like, sure, like, yeah, sure. Like empathizing with people, helping
Totally.
people feel heard and understood. And even that, my professor was like, don't say that. And I'm like, what? It was just like things that I just like couldn't really understand. Like, okay, so I'm not supposed to bring myself into the therapy room. I'm not supposed to show up, like you mentioned, like in this authentic way. That doesn't feel genuine. That doesn't feel good. And in grad school, I remember feeling like, am I a bad therapist? Like, am I just not meant to do this? Is there something that I'm doing that is harmful even? Um, which now I also agree is like a lot of bullshit. Thankfully, I've again found like my own community and community of therapists who do encourage, showing up as yourself and showing up authentically in the therapy room. And that can look like a lot of different things.
Mhm.
But yeah, we're taught so much like bullshit in school that just I'm like, that is not for me. I'm so sorry. But if you want a blank slate therapist, it's not going to be me. And I think that's especially been coming up around um, standing up for Palestine and standing up against genocide, right? Like, I
Mhm.
think I've been really disappointed in the mental health field
Mhm.
for this like complicity and just like silence. And
Yeah.
this feels very connected to like, blank slate therapy and not bringing politics into the therapy room, even though
Yes.
the personal is political and the political is personal. And, standing in solidarity with Palestine means that we stand in solidarity with all oppressed people.
Mm.
And, especially with therapists who claim to be like trauma informed and social justice oriented, and the silence from these therapists, it sucked to see from a lot of therapists with big platforms and who have voices in this field, to not use it for this
Mm.
has been jarring. And so, yeah, I'm like, this is what decolonization looks like. Like, it's not just a theory. This is what it looks like in practice, and this is what decolonizing psychiatry and mental health in general is. Like this is it. Um,
Yeah. It means
so
being
yeah,
uncomfortable, being
yeah.
vulnerable, putting yourself at risk. I just had a conversation with another human and we talked about the privilege of being able to pay attention or step into something and stepping out of it. And I don't know that they loved it, but they sat with it. And that felt very hopeful when someone could just sit with something very uncomfortable and not be defensive to it, not feel protective of themselves. And um, I think that's the work of decolonization on any level is can we just name it and sit in something that's really hard and be compassionate and empathetic and supportive and take risk. Often as therapists, we're taught to not take risk, not show up, not use our voice. And my beginning is also in social work. And so that social justice warrior is like
Yes.
very strong.
Oh yeah.
And it's especially as a woman of color, it can be hard because there's so much pressure and narrative around if you're too loud, if you're too angry, if you're too this, too that, right? You can't be too much. Don't be so dramatic. That's a hard
Yeah.
place to be, especially in our institution of mental health and therapy. So
Yeah.
learning how to show up differently is important, and I'm glad that you're doing that work and you're naming the things um, because it is modeling what needs to happen, especially in the next generations of mental health. Like we are in a worldwide crisis, and
Mhm.
it sometimes feels like no one's really paying attention other than those who are directly impacted.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. Thanks for saying that. Yeah, that's something too that I think can be kind of an interesting balancing act is, kind of, is this actually like triggering for me, or is this actually causing me harm, or am I just uncomfortable?
Mhm.
Sometimes those two things can kind of feel sticky and the lines are kind of blurred. But I think it's important to, yeah, really name, our positionality and really be able to, like you said, sit in the discomfort. Sometimes shit is very uncomfortable. I mean, genocide should make us feel uncomfortable, right? Like
Mhm. Mhm.
anti-blackness should make us feel uncomfortable. Fascism should make us feel uncomfortable.
Mhm.
If we go too far, and this is something that I think is kind of problematic about the mental health field and just like the wellness vibe in general is just like this, like always having your inner peace and not letting people or anything disrupt your peace, which I just think really strips us from our own humanity and
Mhm.
actually encourages like dissociation in a lot of ways, which I think
Yes.
dissociation is great and like is actually a really amazing way that we cope.
Mhm.
um and like our peace should be disruptive right now, quite frankly. I mean, we're contending with
Mhm.
really big things here,
Mhm.
that should disturb us. And so, yeah, it's been really challenging, especially, we have access to endless videos and endless images that are gruesome, right? That are
Mhm.
just horrific. And I think on one hand, some people just kind of tune out entirely and just completely opt out. And on the other hand, there's doom scrolling that happens, right? And so that's
Mhm.
another thing that that is new, right? We didn't always have access to these images 24/7, and now we do. And how are we going to navigate that? And what is our place in this fight towards liberation? I think we all have a place in it, and I think a lot of folks are just kind of figuring it out now. Um, but it's important work.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. You use this word liberation, and I'm very curious about how you have experienced liberation and identity.
Hmm.
Dun, dun,
Okay.
dun.
Big question. Liberation and identity. I think it's been a long, long journey again. Yeah, I think in regards to the identities that I hold, my Honduran identity is really important to me. I think being a Honduran person in Texas, where there's a lot
Mm,
of like Mexican American, Mexican Chicano folks who live in Texas, there's a lot of like erasure that happens around like Central American identities, especially.
mhm,
Um, that has always been something that I have lived with
mm,
as as a Texan and as a Honduran.
mhm,
I think it wasn't probably until college where I really like became like a very strong advocate for Central American voices,
mhm,
and really connected with other Central Americans who have experienced like a similar type of erasure and xenophobia. Um, so yeah, that's been a really fun journey for me, actually. My husband is also Salvadoran, and so we share like this common like Central American identity.
mm,
A lot of commonalities there, I meant to say. So yeah, that's been really cool. I'm really lucky that my mom is from Honduras. She's an immigrant. My
mm.
dad is just a white guy from Texas, and they both like really made sure that I felt really connected to my Honduran culture, and that um, I do speak Spanish, not well, but I do speak it. So I'm really thankful for
Mhm,
that.
mhm.
I know so many Latinos, just in general in the US, have had to assimilate and have lost a lot of their culture and their
Yes.
language. And that sucks.
Mhm,
But yeah, I'm hopeful for future generations that we can reconnect to our roots and where we came from. I think that is a form of decolonization and liberation.
mhm,
Just getting in touch with our ancestors, right? Too, I think is really liberating work for ourselves, right, as individuals. Um, and yeah, I'm also non-binary, which has been a very weird and interesting journey for me too. My community and my inner circle has been so supportive and
mm,
so amazing around that.
mhm,
Um, it's not really something I actually talk about a lot or that I bring up very often
mhm.
because it still is like, how do I feel about my gender? I don't know all the time. Some days I
Yeah.
know, other days I'm like, question mark.
Mhm.
So it's kind of an identity that is still doing some liberation work, perhaps. But we're doing it. So
Yes.
yeah, I guess does that answer your question?
Yes. And I think you're naming very important things around erasure, and even lateral oppression that happens often in what I see happens in a lot of marginalized communities, and it is that way of coping for survival and assimilation and getting needs met on a very basic level. And language is such an important grounding and rooting in a way back to something that is sacred. So I'm really
Yes.
glad that both of your parents recognized that need and fostered that so that you could have that connection to identity, because it's all of it is equal, all of it holds power, all of it is important and beautiful.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's interesting to see how many folks kind of come into this later on in life. I think, as kids, you really want to fit in, and depending on where you grew up as a child, like if you're a child who held marginalized identities and you were in a very like white heteronormative space, there maybe wasn't a lot of room for this exploration. I know that was true for me in some ways. And so, yeah, I think so many folks kind of come into this personal work later in life as adults. And this is work that I really love to do with folks as a therapist. I think identity work is so much fun. I think it
Mm,
can be so liberating, so freeing, so just like connecting to
mhm,
yourself and to your roots. Which yeah, I think everybody should get to experience that. It's a really cool experience. And it sucks that colonization has taken so much from us. Like I
mhm.
think there's a lot of grief that comes with that work too, right? Around like, damn, like a lot has been lost, a lot has been taken from me and from my family and from my ancestors. So we do what we can with what we've got.
Mhm,
Yeah, it's really cool work.
mhm. Yeah, some of my favorite work is, the reworking of someone's identity. There's nothing like watching someone find themselves, find their own voice, their empowerment, who they want to be, their strengths, their grief. It's beautiful to witness, and you can't heal unless you go through that grief work because it
Ah,
is
yeah.
so complex and often unresolved, even in ways that we don't recognize until we're kind of in it. And it's always something that's continually developing. So it's
Oh
awesome that
yeah.
you're able to do that work. And I love that you do part work. I also do part work in EMDR. So yeah, it makes sense that you're able to hold these bigger tensions because you do that work. I think it's so directly connected.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes. I think grief is such a big part of the work that all of us do, especially around identity and with trauma too. Grief comes up in really surprising ways very often. I think the most surprising way in my experience that it comes up is around just like acknowledging, like, oh, I did deserve better. This was like a harmful thing that I experienced. And even, you would think like, okay, letting like releasing that and not taking responsibility for things that were not yours to carry to begin with
Mhm.
seems like something that is intuitive and maybe even easy, but it's not. Like people like we really
No.
hold on to these things because it's comfortable, it's what we know, it's easier to shame ourselves than to have other people do it for us. And in some of this releasing, we're grieving,
Mm.
and it's heavy and it's unexpected so often. But you're right, like it is so necessary to do this work, to really do like healing. Um, we do have to grieve, and it's painful and it's not easy. And I'm always like, it's not a good time, guys. Like it's gonna suck probably, and
Yeah.
that's okay. Like we can be in the grief together.
Mhm. And I think that's huge, having someone who's willing to sit in it with you for as long as you need to, or someone who's willing to revisit those really dark places as many times as you need to, because everything can get so internalized, so deeply internalized, and we really can't tell the difference at times between what is me and what we have experienced, or what is society, what is the colonization. And so it can be difficult to part out what you want to keep or what you want to rebuild, versus letting go and releasing and moving through. And it's wonderful when there's a new generation of therapists who can really understand the complexity of that work.
Yeah,
It's so
absolutely.
needed. It's a breath of fresh air, really.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned parts work. Love it. I think it's like such a compassionate way to think about the traits that we've developed that have helped us survive,
Mhm.
and cope with really harmful, traumatizing things that have happened to us. Don't know where I was going with that, but just
Okay.
remembered you hearing saying parts work, and I was like, oh yeah, parts work.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. I think, anyways, yes, I think that doing this like experiential somatic work is really crucial, right? Because too, I think so much of Western psychiatry has denied us of these really important parts of ourselves and of like our spirituality and of our understanding of ourselves, and keeps us like really just in the cognitive part of our brain all the time.
Mhm.
And um it's nice to kind of let go of that a little bit and to explore like, okay, well, how is this showing up in your body right now? Like you've been taught to suppress so much that you feel literally, like
Mhm.
physically.
Mhm.
How can we bring that back into the space and do so in a way that feels safe but also might be
Mhm.
uncomfortable? How do we invite these like big, difficult feelings into the room with us that, again, might be really uncomfortable and even painful? But um, yeah, no bad parts. All parts are welcome. All feelings and sensations are welcome into the space. But
Mhm.
it takes time to even be able to like get there. Allow yourself
Oh
to
yeah.
get there.
Oh yeah. I always tell people like if you think you're going to be, better, air quotes for people listening, or fixed in 6
Yeah.
months, good luck to you. I don't do that work. I do long term. I'll work with people for years because sometimes it can take years just to get trust from certain parts that you don't even know exist on a
Oh,
conscious level yet. So
yeah.
buckle in, you know. Uh,
Literally buckle up. Yeah.
yep.
Yeah.
How have you I'm thinking of the parallel processing of, when we're doing our own healing work and when we're also helping people heal. How have you held yourself through that healing work? Like, how have you taken care of yourself? What is your self-care practice like?
Great question. Yeah, man, self-care, that's a hard one. I'll be honest. I mean, I've been in and out of therapy for a little while. I'm actually starting with a new therapist very soon. Very excited about that. Yay, we love therapy. Um, I think so. I've done like so much healing by just meeting myself where I'm at.
Hmm.
I think for so long in my life, I was trying to just like attain this like healed version of myself as if it's like this final destination that you can even reach. Like you mentioned, working with people for years. Like,
Mm.
yeah, healing is like a practice. Like it's not just like a place that we get to eventually. I don't believe that healing works in that way.
Yes.
And so I've just done a lot of just like, okay, this is where I'm at. This is what I'm experiencing. This is what my body is telling me. These are the cues that my body is sending me right now. How can I work with that instead of against it?
Mm.
I went through a long period of just like really intense anxiety in my early 20s that I like could not figure out. I
Mm.
was like, why do I feel like shit literally every day all the time?
Mhm.
It was just like this big mystery to me. And I would do everything I could to avoid feeling anxious and avoid like falling down into this like anxiety spiral and rumination
Mm.
snowball effect. And when I finally was just like, okay, you know what? I have this anxious part. This part deserves some space and it deserves to be nurtured.
Mm.
Um, it deserves to be seen and held and
Mhm.
understood. And when I finally just stopped working against it, so freeing. So freeing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm experiencing something similar around like dissociation. I've really been thinking about how dissociation has served me well in a lot of ways
Yes.
and
Yeah.
does still, right?
Yes.
Like
Oh, yeah.
I'm
We all
very
do
good
it. It's
at
so normal.
compartmentalizing. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Um, and now that I've like, and it was something that I was really afraid of. Like I was really afraid of my dissociation for a very long time. I didn't understand it. I was like, why is this happening to me? Like this is so weird.
Mhm.
Recently though, I've really been able to just like allow it to be here.
Mm.
And just noticing like how when I befriend my dissociation, when I befriend all of my parts,
Mhm.
I'm able to work with it. And that's when I'm really able to recognize like, okay, this is how you're trying to keep me safe. This is
Mhm.
how you're actually like working for me.
Mhm.
And maybe these are
Yes.
ways where like maybe I don't need you so much in these moments. And I actually do want to be present and grounded. And I actually can feel at ease and I can feel comfortable. And this environment with my chosen family, with my people, in nature, and the sunlight, right? Like when I'm dancing, when I'm singing, like these are times where like my parts can maybe chill a little bit. And so it's really been just like such a journey. I think for a long time I thought self-care and healing looked a specific way. And I think this is like a very like capitalist, like wellness idea of what self-care is, like bubble baths and consumerism. Like
Yes. Yes.
it did
Yeah.
not solve my problems, surprisingly. Sarcasm. Yeah, literally the most healing thing for me has just been meeting myself where I'm at, literally.
Mm,
So that's where
I
I'm
love
at
that.
in this
I
life.
love
Yeah.
that. I mean, it's really what you're describing is that idea of compassionate inquiry and
Mhm.
compassionate holding. And so much freedom can happen when we're just open and we're curious to
Oh, yeah.
explore and to hold and to be. One of my favorite sayings is to just be with it. And I constantly have to ground in that when shit comes up for me of like, okay, this is feeling really difficult and I just need to be with it. And I don't always have that time or space or energy. And so sometimes even disassociating or putting it away until I can come back or until I am with community or with my therapist, and then we can explore that is essential. Understanding
Agreed.
tolerance and capacity is huge. But
Mhm.
yeah, we definitely, I agree with that sentiment of this idea of self-care is very colonized. Even this, I use a lot of guided imagery with people in a lot of meditation practice, and people will often be like, well, my mind isn't blank. I'm not meditating. Well, no shit. Like, that's not what
Yeah.
meditation really is. Like, that's an unrealistic goal. But can you go for a walk and notice the trees? Can you notice the sunlight on your skin? Can you be with a friend and just be present in what your body feels like? So, firm believer in the fact that it all has purpose and it all can be beautiful and also balanced with mess. So I hear that in
Yeah.
your story, and you've done so much work in your journey to really get to where you are today, eh, more of a place of self-acceptance and compassion, and that's awesome. You should feel so proud of you.
Ah, thank you. Thank you for saying that. Yeah. Same to you. Look at us. I love to
Look
see
at
us
that.
thriving. I'm so glad you brought up meditation because I have chronically, literally until like a couple months ago, I've always been like, I hate meditation. I'm so bad at it. Like, I cannot clear my mind. I just can't do it. And then I did a workshop with Marshall Lyles,
Mhm.
wonderful therapist, amazing human being.
Mhm.
And I had this conversation with him, and he was like, exactly what you just said. Like you don't have to clear your head to meditate. Like try meditative like practices, and even when you are going to like a space in your head, if the thoughts are coming up, maybe they just need some space to be there. And
Mhm.
that's okay. Doesn't mean you're not meditating or that you're doing it wrong. Like you can just allow it to happen. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
wow,
Well, it's
cool.
such a different way of what we're taught.
Yeah.
So it is awesome to hear that people are teaching that way and holding
Yes.
space that way.
Yes.
Yeah.
So many amazing teachers out here, teaching me about myself and how I want to be as a therapist and how I want to show up as a therapist. I feel like I just am constantly like pulling from other therapists and healers and people just and even from my own clients. Like my clients will share wisdom with
Mm,
me and I'm like, "Ah, that's amazing. I'm taking that. I'm going to spread it to the world. Like that is incredible."
yes.
Um, yeah, so grateful for all of the mentors in the world, which we all have that in us, I think.
Yeah. I always say when you think you have it figured out, you probably really don't.
No.
So the learning and the growing never stops. I hate to break
Never.
that to you.
Yeah.
Like having that imposter syndrome doesn't end. But just recognizing that you hold importance and weight in your own way in what you're doing. And it's not a game of comparison. It's just how to hold yourself in a space that is complicated and having good, safe support, community. So you have found those pieces.
Yeah. That is worth celebrating, I think. It's been a long year.
Oh, 100%, 100%. It is definitely worth celebrating. And when we think about trauma and what trauma does to the brain, often it can lead to isolation and shame. And so when you begin to untangle those pieces and allow yourself to heal within community and start beginning to hold a balance of compassion and shame, or even more compassion than shame, that's how we know we're on the right path. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I always say, I think this was in my bio, but the catalyst to healing is connection.
Mhm.
We cannot heal in isolation. Like we are
Mhm.
meant to exist within a collective. And I really do believe like we as individuals are only as well as the collective.
Mhm.
We only have each other. Literally,
Yes.
we only have each other. And there's so much power in that,
Mhm. There
which is
is.
something I always fall back on.
Well, energy is energy, right? And so you think of
Mhm.
the energy of one versus the energy of 5 or 10 or 20, like it grows and it strengthens. And so, of course, that gets impacted by, yeah. So I
Yeah.
agree. I
Yeah.
agree. Wonderful. Well, I appreciate you showing up today in vulnerability, and full strength, full embodiment. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Heather. This was so fun. I was so like nervous going in. I'm like, I've never been on a podcast. I don't know how this is gonna go.
Well, you know, over here we believe in just kind of winging it. So you get to show
Love
up
that.
and be who you are and messy. And, you know, I'm constantly telling Brennan, please edit that out. Please
Yeah.
cut that. I don't have it figured out either. We're
Yeah.
just in it.
It's great.
And yeah, it is
Yes.
what it is. So
It is
thank
what
you
it
for being
is.
here. Yeah.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I feel proud of myself that I'm like, I don't think I said anything wild, but maybe later on I'm gonna be like, okay, maybe I did.
Well, and wild isn't necessarily bad. So
Yes.
I
I
think you
love the
said a lot of
mess.
truth. Yes.
Oh,
Things that need to
yes.
be said and called out. So thank you for your bravery in that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you
Of
for giving me the
course.
space.
Of course. So, all right. So, everyone who's listening, tune in next week. Thank you for being here. And you can find Emily Nash at.
Invisible underscore steel, STEL I'm on TikTok, I'm on Instagram. That's there. No, that's all.
Okay. So, tune in and thank you so much. Have a good week.